Hey guys, so just a quick note about the video that you guys are about to watch. So as you know, March is traditionally known as Endometriosis Awareness Month all across the world, right? And during that last weekend is typically when cities and states and countries, we coordinate and come together simultaneously. And that's where we have all of our endo marches and events and expos to bring awareness and to wrap up that last weekend of the month. And as you guys also know, that a lot of that, well, all of that was literally shut down and canceled and postponed due to everything that's going on with the COVID-19 crisis currently. And so, in light of that, Fighting Fiercely partnered with Endo Army and some amazing Endo sisters from literally around the globe to get together and put on what we call the Endo Weekender, which was a virtual online event of different presentations and lectures and events, just so that everybody in the Endo family would not feel so lost and so cheated, out of not having anything to happen because all of our events were canceled. And so, Fighting Fiercely, we were honored and blessed enough to participate in two discussions throughout this weekend. And so, the one that you guys are going to watch now is a video on how to get endometriosis recognized officially in your city or state. Here in Chicago and in Illinois, we were able to get official proclamations. And so this video is going to take you step by step on how you can do the same to get official recognition for endometriosis where you live. Hope you enjoy it.
Hi, welcome back, and thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Michelle N. Johnson, and I am the founder of the Fighting Fiercely Endometriosis Awareness Movement and the author of Fighting Fiercely Unveiling the Unknown About Endometriosis. And today I'm going to be talking with you, sharing a little bit about how I was able to get Endometriosis Awareness Day officially recognized in both my city and state with an official proclamation, and how you can do the same. Well, before we get into that, I want to just give you a little bit of background on like what is a proclamation and why is it important. So by general definition, a proclamation is a public or official announcement, especially one dealing with a matter of great importance. Now, from where I am from, in the state of Illinois, here in the United States, um, our governor defines proclamation is an official document issued by the governor, J.B. Pritzker, to designate a specific time period, a day, a week, or a month for the purpose of raising awareness or celebrating historic milestones. And so one of the reasons I really wanted to get an official recognition day here in not just the state of Illinois, but also in the city of Chicago where I live, is because in all my years of being an endometriosis awareness educator and advocate, it dawned on me a few years ago that Chicago is one of the biggest cities, right, in the world. It's one of what we call one of the greatest metropolitan areas in the United States. And I realized that up until now, we had no far reaching recognition in our city or state for endometriosis. And even though this was a disease that, or it is a disease that affects more women than breast cancer, this is something that is hardly ever talked about here in our city. There was no far reaching discussion or marches or walks or anything like that here in the city of Chicago. And it made me, start thinking like, why is that? Right? Why is that? And so I figured one of the first steps in increasing the awareness for endometriosis in my city and my state would be to request an official proclamation. And one of the many reasons for my doing so is I wanted to, number one, create a civil dialogue of community-based advocacy and to promote our advocacy efforts on a greater scale, again, in both the city and the state. And I wanted to get that widespread recognition for a couple of reasons. Number one, I wanted to give a greater voice to the endo community at large here in both Chicago and Illinois, so that our voices can be heard. Again, when you think about all of the widespread celebrations for even for endometriosis, you may hear of things going on in New York, you may hear of things going on in California, but you don't have any conversation going on here in Chicago. I also wanted to elevate the patient experience by way of using this proclamation to create sort of a bridge between the disconnect between endometriosis patients and the doctors, in as far as the lack of communication and the lack of awareness between both people who are suffering with symptoms but yet haven't been diagnosed, and the doctors who are not fully educated and properly trained in how to recognize and diagnose and treat this disease. So many women here go undiagnosed. On average, it already takes about 7 to 10 years for a patient to be diagnosed with endometriosis. But here, especially in our underserved communities, it adds on to that diagnosis delay because there is no diagnostic testing at the forefront of the conversation the way that there is for getting your mammogram or getting your pap smear or getting your annual women's exam, right? Testing and diagnosis for endometriosis is rarely, if at all, a part of those conversations. And so by getting an official proclamation recognized for both my city and state, I felt that it would hopefully create a domino effect. So to elevate those civil conversations, to elevate that awareness, and so hopefully get the ball rolling so that we will see marches and greater locally recognized events surrounding endometriosis. And hopefully that will trickle down to more research, more funding, more education, and ultimately a cure for this disease, right? So now that I've shared with you a little bit about my why I wanted to get the proclamation, I'll share with you a little bit about the how. Now, mind you, this is just going to be a general overview, as particulars may vary from state to state, right? Or even sometimes there may be differences in how you file between your city and your state, which is something that I found going through this process. But before you even get to wanting to submit your proclamation, you have to think about your why. Why do you want to submit this proclamation? Why does your specific day or cause deserve recognition? So when you're thinking about your why, you want to consider things like, what is the impact of the disease? How widespread is it? What's the number of people affected by this disease? What will be the relevance of this proclamation once it is issued to you? You want to think about things like, how catastrophic is this particular cause or illness or disease, not just for the patient or the sufferer as an individual, but how does it impact their family? How does it impact their livelihood? How does it impact their community even? And also, speaking of communities, you want to take a look at, are particular communities affected? As I mentioned just a moment ago, in many communities, underserved communities in Black neighborhoods, again, our diagnosis delay tends to be longer because of lack of access, right, to adequate testing, adequate hospitals, adequate medical facilities. So that's another big one to consider. So once you kind of gather together and put together your reasons for your why, the second thing that you want to do is find your local governing body. Who is the governing body for issuing proclamations in either your city or state or both? So for our state of Illinois, that would be our governing body, the office of the governor. And then for the city of Chicago, that would be the office of the mayor. And so for both of those, you would find those proclamations on the website of each. So for the state, you would go to State of Illinois, you would go to illinois.gov and then find the contact tab. And underneath the contact tab, you'll see the link for a proclamation request. For the city of Chicago, it's a little bit different. You'll go to City of Chicago, chicago.gov, and then you'll click on the tab. There's a tab that says government, and then you'll find a tab that says Office of the Mayor. And then you'll just follow the steps there for requesting a proclamation from the mayor. Now, I do want to know, even in my experience, a couple of differences just between the city and the state. Now, when issuing the proclamation from the governor's office, they do have a requirement that your proclamation request must come from a nonprofit organization. So either you have to be a member or an affiliate with a nonprofit organization, or have the endorsement of a nonprofit organization. And what do I mean by an endorsement of a nonprofit organization? So I am a Chronic Disease Coalition patient ambassador under the umbrella of the Chronic Disease Coalition. And so through my relationship with the Chronic Disease Coalition, I was able to use their positioning as a not-for-profit organization to apply for my proclamation. And so in addition to having needing to have a nonprofit organization, you also need to include the organization's name along with their mission statement. Now, a not-for-profit organization affiliation is not necessary when filling out for the city. So again, in your individual states, cities, townships, municipalities, you want to find out what your specific recommendations are, because even here in the States, again, it can vary. Using California as an example. Now, here in Illinois, I was able to request both proclamations for city and state via email. But in California, you must have what's known as a legislative champion, and then you have to physically go and present your request to the legislative body. So again, little nuances there that vary from state to state. Now, after you have located your governing body via email and found the appropriate tabs, you'll see the forms come up, and just basic contact information, name, address, email, things like that, the date you want the proclamation issued for, so on and so forth. And the last piece, the crux of the proclamation request for city or state, is what's known as your whereas statements, okay? Now, when you look up the definition of a whereas statement, what does that clause whereas mean? It simply means taking into consideration the facts of. So what does that mean? So all of your reasoning in the beginning, when you were listing out all of your reasons why, and your why you wanted to have a proclamation, you're going to pull all of that together and you're going to formulate your whereas statements, and that's going to serve as your justification as to why you want the proclamation. Now, some cities and states have both a minimum and or maximum required number of whereas statements. So for the state of Illinois, they require a minimum of 4 whereas statements and 1 therefore statement. And so if you're looking like, I don't know what that is, what does that mean? I'm going to share the whereas statements that I used because I use them both for the proclamations for both the city as well as the state. And so we had a total of 6 whereas statements. And so I'll go through them quickly here for you. Whereas the Chronic Disease Coalition is a nonprofit organization that was founded to advocate for people living with chronic diseases and to prevent discriminatory policies and practice. And whereas endometriosis is a painful disorder in which the presence of endometrial-like tissue is present outside the uterus. And whereas endometriosis affects thousands of women throughout Chicago, more than 5 million across the United States, and more than 200 million women around the world. And whereas endometriosis affects a diverse group of women regardless of race, religion, and financial status. And whereas it is important to spread awareness, increase community engagement, and continue to advocate for patients living with endometriosis to improve the quality of care and the quality of life for patients. And whereas the Chronic Disease Coalition, a nonprofit organization that works to raise awareness, protect the rights of chronic disease patients, and advocate for patient first policies, has designated March 10th, 2020 to be Endometriosis Awareness Day to raise awareness and foster understanding. Now, therefore, that's your therefore statement. I, Lori E. Lightfoot, Mayor of the City of Chicago, do hereby proclaim March 10th, 2020 to be Endometriosis Awareness Day in Chicago and urge all residents to support those with endometriosis. Hereby issued this 30th day of January in 2020. So hopefully that helps to give you a clear idea of what your whereas statements are and what they should look like or read as. So again, you're basically taking the overview of your justification for your why you want to have this proclamation, and then you're breaking it down into specifics. And so once you enter that information into your proclamation request, you want to review everything, make sure all of the contact and information is correct. All of the spelling, all of that is correct because they're not going to double check that for you. And then review it. There's something that I am missing. Oh, both my requests gave the option for the city, you had the option to either receive it by postal service, by mail, hard copy mail, or email. And you also had the option if you wanted to go and pick it up in person from the office of the mayor. With the state, you had the option to receive a physical proclamation in the mail, which is, I'll show you. This one is like more of like an official scroll. Like this one is really, really large. It's not the paper size like the one from the city. But they do give you the option to have it sent by mail or via email also. So you do have some options there. And then once your proclamation is submitted, it usually takes about 4 to 6 weeks to receive word as to whether or not your proclamation is denied. And if by chance it is denied, although I don't see why it would be, and there weren't any specific reasons listed, I would imagine if there's some pertinent information that may have been left out of the application, you can always resubmit. I know that when I initially submitted my proclamation request to the state of Illinois, somehow it got lost in the shuffle of email purgatory, and it wasn't even seen until the end of the year in December of 2019. And so the representative was very nice, just reached out to me via email saying, I'm so sorry, this was overlooked, just please resubmit at the start of 2020, which I did, and I had no problem the second time around getting it approved. And that's it. The process is relatively straightforward and simple. Now, if you are living outside of the U.S., again, and your local governments may be structured differently than ours here in the U.S., what my recommendations to you guys would be is to identify your local governing body. Again, for your township, city, municipality, however that's structured there where you live, you'll want to find who is the local presiding governing body there. Once you've identified who that is or what that organization is, then you'll want to reach out to them either by phone or email and to find out what that specific process is in your area. So I hope you guys have found this to be helpful for you. And I think at least for those here in the States, the more states that we get to recognize this day, the louder our voices will be heard, the more we can come together as an endometriosis community to petition the powers that be, right? To not only hear our voices, but to take action. There's a meme I saw floating around on the internet that said, if endometriosis was a man's issue, it'd be solved already, right? Now, I say that not to disparage guys, and not to say that that statement is wholly true, but I'm saying it because the women and children and young girls that are affected with endometriosis, we need our collective voices to be heard as loudly and as powerfully as we can. And getting official proclamations in your city and state is just one way to do that. And also one quick point, some city or states, it may not be called a recognition, a proclamation, it may be called an official recognition. So just be mindful of the language there. But again, I hope that you have been educated, enlightened, and empowered and inspired even to go to your local city or state website and to fill out a proclamation, because we need to keep this chain going. We need to keep those collective voices being heard, and we need to keep pushing locally with our civil engagement as much as we can and as far as we can, so that we can begin to be taken seriously, and that we can get that funding and that research and that education out there. And like I said in the beginning, ultimately a cure, right? Because that is the thing that we all are fighting for, which is a cure, right? So again, thank you guys so much for stopping by and checking out this presentation. I hope that you gained something useful from it. Feel free to reach out to me on any of my social media platforms. You can connect with me. I'm on Instagram and Twitter at FightFierceEndo. You can also connect with me on Facebook, facebook.com/Fighting Fiercely. Feel free to reach out with me to me with any questions or comments you have. I'd love to connect with you. And until next time, be educated, be enlightened, be empowered.